Here we are. Okay, good morning, everybody. This is Simone or Simo. We have a special guest, Datuk Sir Dr. Denison Jayasooria, who is an academician at UKM, National University of Malaysia, and is one of the key prominent expert on SDG in Malaysia, but also globally. And he's also the co-chair and founder of the Malaysia CSO-SDG Alliance, that is the group of civil society organization who has been really advocating for the country, for the nation to step up on its commitment on SDG. So thank you so much, Mr. Denison. Thank you so much for being with us. And
yes, thank you.
Yeah, so we have a set of questions. So the focus, as you can imagine, is on SDG because Malaysia just recently, 2 days ago, submitted its second Voluntary National Review. That is the main reporting document on the SDG, on the progress being made, but also on the challenge ahead. And was a big improvement, I think, in relation to the first VNR presented in 2017. And it's very important to have Mr. Denison here with us because Mr. Denison played a big role in creating, a totally different, environment, enabling environment this time for the country to present a much stronger document. So. What do you, just initial comment about, about the journey being made by Malaysia in relation to 2017, where the civil society back then was not very much involved or not as much involved as this time around. So what's your opinion? Are you satisfied? What's your thinking?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm happy to share the Malaysian journey and experiences. The United Nations agreed in September 2015 on the SDGs to replace the Millennium Development Goals, and Malaysia was party to it, and Malaysia presented an early report in 2017, which was more aspirational. It was trying to link SDGs to the development plans. But even then in 2017 preparation, there was a lot of consultation with civil society to provide input. But the 2021 is a far more enriched experience because we are over a 5-year period. The period is much longer from 2017 to 2021. And in that process, there were a lot of engagements with the Economic Planning Unit through discussions on development planning, on the parliamentary group on SDG, on poverty, and so forth. And in 2021, civil society was a member of the drafting group of the Technical Working Committee, as well as the Steering Committee, and we saw the drafts, and we corrected the drafts, we improved the drafts, and so forth. But we were told, and we agreed, this is a government report, and so in the report, to be fair to the government, they added many issues under issues and challenges or way forward. So what is interesting is the acknowledgement of Malaysia this round that there are challenges vis-a-vis poverty or health or the pandemic, but it's an ongoing process of development. So the engagement was better, but civil society is saying there is very intense discussion in preparing the report. But we are saying our next report is going to be in 4 years' time. And why not we have regular engagements on progress, on issues, trying to address some of the critical concerns in a multi-stakeholder engagement. In the VNR report, the government has promised to intensify the engagement both at the national and the local level, but no operational modalities have been released? Who will have access? Is it open and transparent? Would all the data be released? Although data, unlike 2017, we didn't have it, but for 2021, the Department of Statistics published two reports in 2018 and 2019, and they have been very open to civil society, but then they tell us some data is not being collected. They are recognizing micro data from civil society more as case studies. So there is the qualitative end, but the government machinery through census and surveys give quantitative data in that context. So it is an enriching experience. There are challenges. Some sections of civil society feel they couldn't participate because it is not citizenry engagement in opinion poll, grassroots. It's more civil society, academia, private sector, government agencies, and the window for preparation was quite tight. I think the process started maybe earlier at government level, but our involvement in writing or review started only in February and by June. So we, so civil society had many discussions on our own to collect, we compiled it, we submitted, and so forth.
Wow. So, I mean, it's a big change. I mean, it's a big change. As you said, there is a different approach, I guess, from the government of Malaysia this times around that also brought to a much stronger institutionalization at the highest level within the Prime Minister's office, with the Minister of Finance. And I know that you, as you just said, you mentioned that you are open and you are still advocating for not to wait too long, the next VNR for reviving this kind of, cooperation between, government and civil society. And you are actually, and, the Malaysia CSO-SDG Alliance is trying to convince the Prime Minister office to have quarterly meeting, right? Quarterly review.
Yes.
So, I mean, are you, despite the challenges in politics in Malaysia right now, are you hopeful that at least at bureaucratic level with senior officer, you might be able to have such a quarterly review and progress discussion?
Okay, I just wanted to, Simon, make one correction. In Malaysia, the office of the Prime Minister or Prime Minister's office is different from the Prime Minister's department. Prime Minister's office is immediately an office under him with special advisors and so forth. Whereas the Prime Minister's department has a minister or ministers supervising central agency, interagency departments and ministries. So the economic planning unit comes under a minister, the economic minister, who presented the VNR report the other day. Now, we are hopeful because in the dialogue process in preparing the way forward, civil society raised that. It was a reasonable suggestion. What we were saying is, look, preparation to VNR, which is once in 4 years, is so intense, and we are happy with that. But we are willing to come on a regular basis. They have given us the word, and they have listed it in the VNR report as a possible way. Now, what the economic minister has done recently in the lineup and the preparation to VNR, there were a lot of discussions on poverty in Malaysia, new phases of poverty, poverty as a result of the COVID situation. And what he has initiated on his own with the economic planning unit and the department, that is the central agency, is what he calls a poverty circle. Poverty circle meaning not the poor people, but all the researchers academic institutions, plus the government agencies that are responsible for poverty will meet with the minister once a month. That is unbelievable. And we had the first meeting last month. We have a second meeting next week. So I'm quite impressed that an engagement of poverty. So in that poverty discussion, we take up like measurement of poverty, documentation, identification of the poor, the delivery, critical issues like social security, social insurance, and the new faces of the poor, both rural and urban, as a result of COVID. Many people have lost their jobs. Informal sector have no savings. Informal sector, mainly women-led households, are affected by the lockdown, their inability to travel. So to have more long-term solutions, improved IT communication for the bottom end, better access to marketing through digital forms, so that you can even sell online products, tailoring, food, which has taken place for restaurants, food delivery, and with logistic support of motorbike riders or car transport. Those are the new phases of business. But building the capacity of local entrepreneurs. So in that light, we are hopeful, and civil society has been supportive. So one good example is next week, we have a series of post-VNR discussions. This was initiated by the all-party parliamentary group of members of parliament with the civil society, with a think tank group called Masa Institute, to then engage with government to say, look, this is your report. These are the issues you have identified. This is the way forward. Every panel has 4 speakers: government, parliamentarian, civil society, and a think tank group. And we then want to do a report on the way forward. So I'm sure regular engagement at the national, at the ground level would be, because I think the main concern is not just to criticize government for the sake of criticizing. It is to improve delivery, that no one is left behind.
Absolutely.
And civil society feels that whether it's a migrant worker, it's a single mother, it's an undocumented person, they have no power or right, and they seem to be ignored or left behind. And this is where the advocacy is for government to then say, look, we need to address these groups as well and to document it.
Yeah,
That
it's like
we are hopeful.
yeah.
That we are hopeful, Simon.
Yeah, it seems that, I mean, the VNR, I mean, the second VNR is really very much focused on SDG 1, and also very concerned about the B40, the bottom 40, that probably is getting bottom 50. I mean, it's as you said, the number of people now facing challenges, it's much higher. I think there is also particular concern about the Orang Asli, the indigenous community, that have been quite neglected so far. But even though the government, I mean, during the COVID crisis with its different packages, they've been trying to address also, you know, the unique circumstances of indigenous group.
Yeah, I think in terms of indigenous communities and native communities, like in the interior on the Borneo island of Sabah and Sarawak, they have been disadvantaged because that development has not come really into very interior locations, or many of these groups that are still very tribal and aboriginal are isolated from mainstream development. So the community-based empowerment strategies are much stronger than trying to destroy the forests and take them out of their own comfort zones to make them urbanized or bring them into new environments. The department that is responsible has been addressing some of these concerns, but from the human rights perspective, the area that is neglected is the land rights of these communities. Many of their lands have been taken over by business companies for oil palm plantation, dam development, and this has isolated them from their traditional habitat and also reliance on forest-based products. Now, Simon, this is where Nepal is far more outstanding in this because they introduced community forestry as a major strategy. Now, Malaysia in the 11th Malaysia Plan introduced community forestry as one strategy where people living either in the forest or surrounding the forest are made custodians of the forest for conservation and income generation. Conservation, in a sense, you don't need forest rangers, you don't, because these people walk to the forest barefooted with nothing in their hands because they know the forest is like a supermarket to them. But outsiders don't know the forest well. They have their burial sites. They know where their grandfather killed, some kind of wild animal and things like that. And so the need to get communities involved then will stop infringement in the forest. It will strengthen conservation. It might protect water sources. It can protect biodiversity because indigenous people or forest-based communities are very protective of the forest. They don't destroy it. They move because they are nomadic, but it's to integrate them into the development plans, conservation plan, and even to see how they can generate income. Like in the projects when I visited Nepal or in Malaysia, they do like honey, bee rearing, wild and in cultured areas. They bottle it, they sell it. They do other kinds of agroforest products without destroying the forest, but maintaining or agro-tourism, protection of wildlife and animal. So to integrate these communities much more into the system. Malaysia has promised in its development planning, but those are the innovative approaches they have to take as opposed to try and isolate them. And because we are in the city, we then look at their life as primitive, backward, and they need to change and become like us. But Simon, during this pandemic period, when I went to one of the indigenous forest communities, it was the most peaceful place. No one is wearing the mask. No one is going out. No one is coming in. They are self-contained villages where they're peaceful, walking around. They have water from the stream. It's a different kind of life. For us, it looks like a holiday. For them, it's real life. But this is where we need to integrate development in a way that communities don't get alienated and we don't exploit the forest in an unbalanced way. It's a challenge for government and government agencies, especially with private sector that might want to take the forest for other cash crops or even for golf course, for dams, for holiday resorts, and things of this sort.
But I mean, the government of Malaysia has also committed not to expand the process of deforestation, right? And it's something quite clear also in the BNR, because as we discussed, there is also a lot of controversy about oil palm, and there is some discussion between the European Union and Malaysia, Indonesia about oil palm. So, I mean, sustainability, I think, is a very key. And you're right, Nepal has this best practice of the community forest group. Absolutely.
I think that, you know, Simon, here the challenge is between central government and state or regional government. So there is a constitutional separation of those powers, and land and natural resources come under the state government or regional government. And so a central agency that might be for environment or forestry only is a regulatory body, but it cannot approve its use. So sometimes for economic reasons, for taxation, the state level might collaborate, and the due diligence like sand mining or minerals near a lake, I think no one is saying you can't do it, but how do you reduce the impact on the environment, or from the profits, how do you address those critical issues? I think that's the challenge in Malaysia. Are the environmental impact assessment reports, the social impact assessment reports on indigenous people, is that process independent, transparent? Are the authorities approving, not caught up in other ways? The civil society accusation often is corruption, abuse of power, lack of transparency in awarding these contracts and so forth. So central government, I think, like the federal government in Malaysia, makes a lot of regulatory promises, but they don't have the control even of the rivers and so forth, the river basins. All this come under other jurisdiction. And so there is a complex. I think this is similar to many countries, but that's where the multi-stakeholder engagement, the public consciousness of right to water, and the protection of water sources, clean rivers, and so forth, becomes very critical for sustainability, because very often we in cities, like in urban Western societies, take many things for granted: the air, the water, and people pollute it. And I think in the West, there is a greater consciousness of separating garbage, waste management is better managed. Here is, okay, I don't want this, I throw it into the river. I don't want this chair, I throw it under a tree. So the public awareness of my responsibility to take care of the environment, because it's going to affect the future generations, is something need greater public consciousness and citizenry education. And that might be lacking in many developing countries in Asia.
So basically, sir, you're basically making the case of the so-called localization of the SDG, like how regional states or local government, and as well people should be part of the conversation and should be engaged as much as the central or federal government. So, I mean, in the last few years, I mean, according to the second VNR, Malaysia did some progress on localizing the SDG. What's your, I mean, I am aware that at least 6 towns have developed some sort of localizing planning. What's your, I mean, perspective? Are you hopeful? Do you think that it's been done enough, or what next in terms of localizing and involving state? I mean, when we will have a Selangor state VNR or Sabah VNR, or KL VNR, localizing plan?
Okay, I think this year 2 cities in Selangor, the city of Shah Alam and Subang Jaya, presented its voluntary local review. This is the first time. And this is coordinated by Ministry of Housing and Local Government, a special unit called Urbanis. And so that's a major step forward. And Urbanis likewise brought out a very interesting booklet, SDG Cities in Malaysia, to give guidelines to local authorities or local government to play an active role. So I think that is important because in some of these cities, Agenda 21 was already practiced before of greater city budgeting and things like that. So that's an important development. But at the same time, the Malaysian CSO-SDG Alliance is working with the Malaysian Parliamentary Group on SDGs called APPGM. We secured some funding through the Ministry of Finance with the support of the Economic Planning Unit to go to districts. We have a historical division of districts and local authorities. It's a bit complicated in that process, but federal agencies are coming under district level under the states. So we are in 31 districts now where we did a local mapping of issues and sought to identify SDG solution projects at the micro level in a multi-stakeholder engagement with government, grassroots communities. The member of parliament played an active role as a local champion. So this is the all-party parliamentary group, and that's a second example of moving it. Now, in most countries, the bureaucracy takes time because SDGs tend to be UN 193 countries making a commitment, then it goes to the central government, and then it cascades downwards. But SDG really is a bottoms-up experience, and so it is the capacity building of staff in the cities and staff at the district level that needs to, and we secured a small budget under the parliamentary group to organize training or briefing or localizing, like how these kind of booklets were done. We are now in the stage of preparing for grassroots servants to implement, because many of the agencies are silo focused. I do welfare, I do poverty eradication, I'm addressing indigenous people, I'm addressing women, I'm addressing youth. But SDGs is cross-cutting. It is interrelating. So how does the welfare case impact indigenous people and their land rights? So land right comes in another department. So everybody is thinking in a box way. This is my mandate. This is what I can do. I cannot interfere in another agency. So in the Malaysian VNR that was released on the 15th of July, government said they will set up multi-stakeholder task force groups at the local level, which will incorporate the district, the government agencies, the city council, that they can have a chat together. So let's say even if they have quarterly meetings, at least there might be working together to address local issues. It could be flooding, it could be a forest, it could be poverty, that they see how it impacts health, education, housing, how it takes a multi-dimensional focus. And so that will be the real test for us over the next 4 years. Do we meet regularly? Do we have these things? Can we at least do like the parliamentary group is in 30 of the 150 districts? So we are in a number of the cities. So if the city VNRs are taking place and we are also there, then we can exchange resources, and we are networking with urbanists as well to see how we can enhance local solution. We are hopeful, we are optimistic, but at the same time, we need to be realistic. pandemic is not leaving us. In Malaysia, Selangor is the highest hit. I think the other day we had 11,000 new cases, over 100 dying every day. That is quite large for a small population like Malaysia. But Parliament is being restored. Parliament is meeting on the 26th,
Yes.
which is a major breakthrough, restoration of democracy and accountability. So we are hopeful in the challenges that SDGs can be realized, but we need to be also cautious because of political contestations and things of this sort, because political will is quite critical in this context, as well as stronger citizenry awareness. I think the consciousness from the ground. This is what I heard in the Denmark story. So in Denmark, every citizen knows his right or her right, and they are, and although it's a small population, they are really pushing their mayors, their people to be held accountable. And because they are online and so forth, they have. And ours is multiracial, multi-religious. We are at different levels of education, different levels of communication. And so the challenges are much more. But I think, you know, it depends. If I'm still around in 4 years' time and you are interviewing me, this might be a good benchmark to check this recording in 4 years' time. God willing, we both still will be around.
Yes, for sure. Hopefully, let's be optimistic. We must be optimistic.
Yes,
but
yes.
so you just raised a very important issue. To my understanding, about civic awareness. Especially, I see youth in Malaysia, but elsewhere, lost a bit, disenchanted, not much interested and on what's going on, probably because of politics, not only in Malaysia, but in most of the places, politics is not really performing the way people expect. So, you as a civil society advocate, you as a sociologist, you as educator, what's your opinion about, what it takes and what is needed to really reinvigorate or bring young people, students on board to make them really more aware, more conscious? As you said, the example of Denmark, it's probably a benchmark on its own, but what could be done? What's the role of the university? I believe the university in Malaysia could play a lot, are not playing the level they could. So what's your taking?
I would think greater awareness at all levels to make SDGs real to individual persons. So the 17 goals should not be seen as something being imposed from the UN. So in some circles in Malaysia, they think this is a Western imposition because the UN is in New York. Then they think it's America. But the UN is not America. The UN is member states of 193 countries. So it is through educational materials, awareness materials on a systematic basis at all levels to make addressing poverty or education or gender as a matter that is linked to me, and it affects me, my family, my neighborhood, and I can find a solution. So citizenry awareness and education. You know what is surprising is during the HLPF period, July 6th to the 15th, there was not a single newspaper in Malaysia, the print, the formal media or the social media carrying news on the UN. Now, the civil society organized sort of press interaction with our news agency and we dispersed the first message on HLPF. Now, why is this so? Because people think this is happening far away. This has no impact because COVID is at my doorstep. I have a relative or friend dying. There are thousands of people in hospital. Why are you going to New York or wanting to sit in a Zoom meeting when you should be distributing food to your neighbor? Those are the kind of reality. But they don't realize that multilateralism is needed for global cooperation to address a pandemic. Because when countries started off with the pandemic, Malaysia had very low rates. The US, even Italy, more people were dying. But with your vaccination program and the herd immunity, the US, even Europe is open now internally. But Malaysia is going through its, real hit phase because of our unpreparedness in addressing it. So it's interrelated to a family capacity for savings, the healthcare system that is overstretched, that cannot address it during this period. So I think it's greater awareness and political government people speaking about it in an open and public way, and educators highlighting it. I'm not saying anything new, but if it doesn't become a talk area in Malaysia, I think now with the minister releasing it yesterday, he highlighted it. But the people are caught up with local issues. So it's an uphill battle, but I think media, academia, civil society continue to champion it. And in Malaysia, the parliamentarians, the 30 who joined our parliamentary group are local champions because they are looking at SDG solutions for their voters. They want to address local problem of poverty or housing or inequality or lack of jobs in a way, and the allocation that Ministry of Finance is giving each member of parliament, although not big, is helpful for micro human relational activities like entrepreneurship training, capacity building, doing, mushroom farm, doing organic farm, and helping the local community, or it could be urban farming, or do an in-depth study. So that is creating some awareness, but we need to do far more, and government needs to sponsor that public civic education. And citizenry needs to not be so complacent and so dependent on the top.
And complaining. Do not
and complaining. Yes, I hope that's what we hope will change.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I mean, you just mentioned. I mean, the all party parliamentarians group Malaysia on SDG, and the collaboration that I think is unique with the Malaysia CSO-SDG Alliance. So it's a unique partnership where you yourself, led the work supporting the all-party parliamentary group on SDG. So how this idea of this caucus, I mean, this group of parliamentarians focused on SDG came up, and how were you able to forge such interesting partnership with collaboration with them? And do you see any risk of yourself being used or instrumentalized, or kind of by politician? Do you think that perhaps you might lose your independence in doing this? But let's start from the beginning, how this collaboration started.
Okay. Thank you. I think it's a very good question, and it needs to be documented, these kind of developments. I think firstly, with the change of government in 2018, the Barisan National fell, and a reformist party actually came in with the promise of reform towards strengthening democracy, good governance, and themes of that sort. So one of the major change or reform or transformation agenda was to reform Parliament. And the Speaker of Parliament, who was a former judge, then instituted that he felt Parliament should be an open engagement with citizens, academics, civil society, and so forth. So you have the formal parliamentary session, but he started to organize parliamentary discussions with parliamentarians and non-parliamentarians in one part of the house for a rich interaction. One of the topics of that discussion was sustainable development goals, and the UN resident coordinator, this was in 2019 when it took place, or towards the end of 2018, that I also participated, many civil society and academia. And at that point, we spoke to the Speaker of the House, the former judge, and he welcomed civil society to his office for a dialogue. And we did a proposal that we wanted, actually originally, a parliamentary select committee on sustainable development goals to monitor and so forth. So we had written a paper, we explained why we wanted a formal engagement with parliamentarians, but wanted it under the parliament system. Now the speaker either was going or returning from the United Kingdom, and he visited the House of Commons and had discussions in the UK, in London, and he came across the all-party parliamentary group in the UK and actually felt that this is a much better system of engagement on a particular topic rather than a parliamentary select committee, because he said while the all-party parliamentary group are parliamentarians, the secretariat can be an academic institution, a civil society, or a non-parliamentary group. And the guidelines was you must source your own secretariat, you must source your own money, but first you must secure the support of at least 5 members of parliament who are willing to join your group. And so we sat down and spoke to different parliamentarians, and they agreed. And we then made a formal application for SDGs, and we had number of parliamentarians. It was bipartisan. The sort of idea was it cannot be from one party. It has to be from the government party and the opposition, and they have to work on a bipartisan process. And the speaker then tabled it. This is unique. They had to table it in the House committee first, then in the open session of Parliament to be noted as a decision of the House that they are going to set up the all-parliamentary group and the guidelines and the procedure. And the first was on SDG, and that civil society, the Malaysian CSO-SDG Alliance, would be its secretariat, so that there won't be any challenge why an outside group is a secretariat. So that was in 2019 by October, and by 2020 we started. We thought at first we will just do policy work and discussions, but we managed to convince the Ministry of Finance to give us a seed capital to encourage 10 parliamentarians to join to apply the localizing project, so that our researchers could go down, we could cover all the expenses, so the parliamentarians would welcome a team from the secretariat to do local mapping of issues, engagement, and then organize solution projects. So they were given not a huge sum, 120,000 Malaysian ringgit per member of parliament to run local projects within the year. Now, we did it well in the first year, and we submitted a report to the speaker, and now it's to be tabled. It's in English and the national language. And for 2021, the Ministry of Finance agreed that we enlarge from 10 to 20 and gave us double the sum which we projected. We are affected by COVID, so we are reaching out to 20 parliamentary constituencies, new ones. So we have 10, now 20. Of the 20, we have already done the mapping for 15, but COVID hit us in different ways, and there is curfew or there is travel restrictions, so we can't. So, but we have very active members on the ground who are themselves experts in different areas. They could be a medical doctor, they could be an activist on democracy, they could have other professional interests. And so from their constituency, they are now raising poverty in high-rise urban poverty. They are looking at fishing community where the fish catch has reduced, or there are environmental issues like flooding, other things. So that is bringing a rich quality of engagement. The management of the funds is under the accountability of the parliamentary group. So any project has to be approved by at least 3 of the 8 members in the committee. That's the quorum that Secretariat presents. So the Secretariat are professionals, non-politicians. Now, your question whether we will be seen as political, we have a very strange experience. When we go to the ground, we are sitting in an office or under the flag of Party A. We go to another town, it's Party B. We go to another town, it's Party C. But we find a common thread in all the parliamentarians. On the ground, they are concerned for the people. It's not so much their party. At parliament debates, they are fighting mad among themselves. But when we go to the ground, whichever party, they look at poverty, they look at single mothers, they want to find a solution. They want government to address it. So there is commonness in addressing issues. Their political party difference, either to try and topple the government or become the next government, is a, so we hold, the Secretariat holds a bipartisan approach. Now, where we are struggling now is because, and HLPF is a good example of this. In HLPF, we are speaking as civil society in the site events and things like that. So we did a scorecard. So the scorecard, which is a methodology introduced by Action for Sustainable Development, that was done in comparison with 17 countries, benchmarking Malaysia in our assessment, will then either paint a good picture or a bad picture for Malaysia. And sometimes government don't like us saying this in a global meeting, because we are now partners. You were in the VNR report, we listened to you, but you went out there and you say, we are bad on SDG 16.
But interestingly, you also prepare an independent, always in partnership with the all-party parliamentarians group, you also prepare an independent, review of VNR, right? That
the civil society didn't do an independent report. We did a report of our submission. So that means we had 5 working groups. We had over 60 people participating in 5 different, like poverty, health, climate change or something, or justice and SDGs partnerships. So those findings were presented. We have a long paper of whatever group submitted. We gave it to the drafting committee. We did a summary of 35 pages, an executive summary, and that's published. That is our submission. We also did a scorecard report.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Which is an independent process of the civil society using the methodology there. It wasn't labeled under the APPGM, but it's similar personalities. So what we are calling in democratic societies, the openness to accept differences, and we are consistent in what we spoke to the economic planning unit during the meetings. So if in our submission we would have said, look, this is weak, this is bad, this is it, we are telling the same thing in the external report.
You are consistent.
It's not like in the meeting room I said everything is good, don't worry, everything, we are happy. We didn't say that. We have said, look, we are happy with many things government is doing, but we hope government can meet us on a regular basis.
Yeah.
We are not very happy with SDG 16, human rights, democracy, victimizing, human rights defenders, the issues of undocumented refugees, migrants, these sort of issues we have highlighted quite strongly, and it's public knowledge. So we are not deceptive, but it is not easy. And we ourselves face it, because when I'm with the NGOs, somebody read the report and said, all my suggestions, not a single thing came out in the VNR report. So I had to say, look, are we faithful in submitting your view? I cannot guarantee, I can guarantee that I've delivered it. But I cannot say, because it's up to government.
Yes.
But I said this is an ongoing advocacy and relationship, which is the kind of tension working with government and politicians and changes.
It's really pilot.
So some people might, some people would find us too close to government. Some government people will think we are too close to the opposition, because I told you of the photos with all the flags of different parties. But that's the thin line we are moving. But what we are assuring the community is, and integrity is, we are committed to the 17 SDG goals from a right to development perspective. That is the normative framework that we are using. So that's the benchmark. So anyone assessing our work then would have to assess and see, are we faithful to them? Did we interact? Did we keep quiet in the meetings? Did we speak out? Were we true? Were we humble enough to approach government and things of this sort? So that is a fine line, and it requires what some might call United Nations diplomacy. And we have to learn that. So we would say we might be critical, but we are constructive. We are engaging. It is not a one-day discussion. It is up to 2030. So it is trust, it's relationship building, it's give and take. That means I win 2 arguments, I lost 8. But that's progress. I got something in, something is not in, rather than walking out of the table. So this is part of the learning to live, the bargaining, and civil society has to recognize that without compromising to the fundamentals, and be humble enough, I would say, to accept that there are failures. We tried, we couldn't get it. We are still in the same, same circles. But I think compared to VNR 2017 and 2021, we have made tremendous progress.
Okay.
Some would say nothing much. I think those of
I
us
agree.
who have
I
been
agree.
in
This is
it
good progress.
have seen a real move to an extent that VNR 2021 acknowledges the all-party parliamentary group. It acknowledges the Malaysian CSO-SDG Alliance as a partner in development. That is a major achievement from 2017.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. I want to go back on the role of the parliamentarians. I mean, on the one hand, I think it's very innovative. It's very good that the parliamentarians really feel so concerned about the issues of the people, of their constituencies. So it's another way, I guess, of localizing the SDGs. But on the other side, couldn't this approach kind of jeopardize the potential role that local bodies, town administration should have in taking the lead in this process of localizing the SDG?
Now, I think the member of parliament is only playing a complementary role. He doesn't have an executive position at local government, let's say city. He or she is not the mayor. So they are using their office as member of parliament at two levels. One, addressing some local concerns in partnership with the government officials as well as civil society. That's one. As well as we are hoping that our work will lead on to them speaking about SDGs in the parliament during the budget speech. Is there enough so that monitoring and accountability would come in, that they should call on government to allocate more funds and resources for SDG development in their own parliamentary constituency. Okay. This is at the policy level. So if they hold that balance, yes. So they are then able, because they're the elected member of parliament. Of course, if they are in the same party running the state government or the federal government, they seem to have more influence in the administration and machinery. If they are not, they still have an influence because of the public office they are holding, and they tend to interact with the mayor, with the district officer, with the officials handling education, welfare, police, these sort of things. They don't brush a member of parliament aside because he might expose it in parliament tomorrow. So why we say they are local champions is it's a face now to someone who is talking about SDGs, who is then reminding people much stronger than us who are not in that constituency or district. So they are a partner. And I think the APPG example from Denmark was a good one. We didn't know there was a global movement and Denmark is leading it. So the parliamentarians in Denmark are playing a similar localizing but also monitoring role for SDGs. Okay. So if every member of parliament uses SDG language to look at the budget, then I think the consciousness of the budgeting process will not just be a small grant for APPG that's SDG. The total budget of the government is pro-SDG, is the way, or it's mainstreaming gender into the budget. It has a pro-poor or people focus in the budgeting process. And Malaysia is coming to the budget in towards the end of this year. And we will see how members of parliament use SDG in their speeches.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Okay.
Towards wrapping up, two more questions, and then I'll.
Okay. It's a long one.
Yes, it's a forced labor. No, I'm joking. So I mean, I'm very interested to know about your opinion about the upcoming 12 national plan. if do you think that the upcoming national plan will be fully aligned to the SDG, and what will be the role of the upcoming SDG roadmap? Is the roadmap going really to focus on localization? What's the difference between the big plan and then the SDG road plan? Is there any overlapping?
Yeah. Now the 12th plan is part of the overall government agenda of 5-year development plans.
Yes.
Malaysia has consistently used 5-year development plans.
Yes.
In the way, but in the 11th Malaysia plan that came out in 2016 or 2015, they did not use the SDG language because that was the formative period. But by the midterm of the 11th Malaysia plan, which was a report that came out in 2018, they had already aligned the development plans to the SDG goals. So if the emphasis on education, economic growth, regional development, they were mapping it with SDGs. So that took place. Now, in the 12th Malaysia plan, it's definitely starting off with the 17 SDGs, and they have incorporated it into the development planning with the focus on shared prosperity agenda 2030. So they use the term shared prosperity because it is not just high income growth, not just income, but also assets, properties, savings. So prosperity is a much broader concept, including health and so forth. Well-being is the term. So the 12th plan, I believe, and now they have listed out, will be launched before the end of the year, will be consistent to that vision. Now, the SDG roadmap, which was prepared much earlier and now released by the Economic Planning Unit, tends to show that the delivery of the SDG is over 3 Malaysia plans. Part 1 was the 11th plan, part 2 is the 12th Malaysia plan, part 3 is the 13th Malaysia plan that will reach to 2030 in terms of its targeting and things like that. So the roadmap is actually a broader picture of the progress that they are charting out, but the details are in the 5-year plans. Now, in the midterm review of the 11th Malaysia plan, Malaysia gave a strong emphasis to reform agenda, governance, strengthening institutions. Now, we'll have to see, because those became weak when the government fell. The newly elected government in 2018 fell, and new government came in at that point. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So when the new government came in, the accusation was they underemphasized reform agenda, human rights, and things of that sort. So we'll have to look and see whether the 12th plan will also have strengthening delivery and institutions as a key mechanism. So the 12th plan, which is a 5-year development planning, will set the agenda. I think rural development, poverty, these sort of things will be a strong component. And the Economic Planning Unit has been quite consistent, irrespective of the governments. They're quite consistent in their development planning. It's the political positioning that changes, but the substance of the plan has been consistent.
Okay, great. Okay, last quick fire question, 1 minute for you to reply. Do you think that Malaysia is doing enough in climate change, or will step up more?
Real what?
On climate
I
change.
couldn't hear you. Sorry.
Do you feel like Malaysia is doing enough in climate
Okay,
change? Or
I think climate change, we are struggling. Okay, can you hear me?
yes.
I think
My
either it's
connection
your
is bit
internet or
unstable.
mine.
Yeah, but I
Okay,
can hear you. Yeah.
okay, okay. Now, on climate change, we are facing challenges. There are promises, but very much so, there is a lot of discussion on strengthening environmental governance, and that has to be seen in that way. The Academy of Science is working on a major project. They have been having consultations with parliamentarians and looking at the critical issues and how best to manage environment, climate change, the whole economic and environmental balance, because there are different jurisdictions in its implementation. And that is something they would have to work towards, and environmental NGOs will have to monitor that closely.
Okay. All right. Dr. Professor Denison, thank you so much for your time, for your exhaustive explanation. So we really appreciate it, and we look forward to have other discussions. So I close here the recording. Thank you so much.